A young girl from Minnesota was building a snowman in her front yard. Her parents went inside for just 5 minutes. When they came back outside, she had vanished without a trace. But 8 years later, her mother hears a young woman's voice singing a lullaby from underneath their neighbor's garden shed. What she discovers next will haunt her forever. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I read every single one. Now, take a breath, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. The small town of Maple Hollow, nestled in the northern reaches of Minnesota, was known for its tight-knit community and brutal winters. With a population of barely 2,000 residents, it was a place where everyone knew each other's business, shared their sorrows, and celebrated their joys together. The town had always prided itself on its safety and low crime rates. Children played freely outdoors, neighbors left their doors unlocked, and the community functioned like an extended family. That was until 8 years ago, when Emma Grace Mitchell vanished without a trace. On a cold Saturday morning, as snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, Sarah Mitchell sat at her dining table sorting through police documents. The papers had become a familiar presence in their home, reports, witness statements, and potential leads that ultimately led nowhere. Her eyes occasionally drifted to the window overlooking their front yard, where her thoughts inevitably returned to that fateful day. Her husband Marcus moved about the house, the sound of his cleaning providing a rhythmic background to her thoughts. The simple act of housework seemed to give him a sense of normalcy, something to occupy his hands and mind. Despite the years that had passed, their home still felt suspended in time, waiting for their daughter to return. "Still going through those?" Marcus asked as he passed by with a basket of laundry. Sarah nodded, shuffling through another stack of papers. "Detective Palmer said they received a couple of new tips last month. Nothing substantial, but—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both lived on these fragments of hope, however small. Emma had been 5 years old, a bright, blonde-haired girl with a laugh that filled their home. That winter morning she had begged to play outside in the freshly fallen snow. Sarah and Marcus had let her, as they had done countless times before. Their property bordered a small wooded area that was familiar territory for local children. Sarah had promised to check on her in 20 minutes. When she went outside, Emma was gone. The search that followed was unlike anything Maple Hollow had ever seen. The entire town had mobilized. Search parties combed the woods. Divers checked the frozen lake half a mile away. Police interviewed every resident. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually the active search was called off. But Sarah and Marcus never stopped looking. The doorbell's chime pulled Sarah from her thoughts. She rose from the table, straightening her sweater as she made her way to the front door. When she opened it, she found Margaret Chen, their neighbor from across the street, standing on their porch. Margaret was a tall woman in her late 40s, with prematurely graying hair and a perpetually serious expression. She had lived in Maple Hollow for over 20 years. But in the decades since losing her husband and daughter in a house fire, she had become increasingly reclusive. "Morning, Sarah," Margaret said, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Sorry to bother you, but the snowstorm last night destroyed part of your fence again. It blew over onto my property." Sarah immediately began to apologize. "I'm really sorry about that, Margaret. That old fence has been giving us trouble for years. I'll come by and take it off your property, but I'll need to get a welder first. Mine's broken and I haven't had the time to buy a new one." Margaret waved dismissively. "Don't worry about it. I already patched it up. I just came by to let you know." Sarah was surprised and felt a twinge of awkwardness. "You didn't have to do that. Thank you." "No problem," Margaret replied with a slight shrug. "I had the tools and was working on something in the back of the house anyway." "Yeah, I heard some noise earlier this morning. Guessed you must be building something back there." Margaret didn't elaborate on what she had been constructing, simply saying, "Sorry if the fence doesn't look as good as new." It's an old fence anyway, Sarah assured her. Thank you again. Margaret nodded and turned to leave. As Sarah closed the door, she found Marcus coming in from the backyard, his cheeks flushed from the cold. Was that Margaret? I heard voices, he asked, unwinding a scarf from around his neck. Sarah nodded. Our fence blew down again. She fixed it herself. Marcus hung his scarf on a hook by the door and smiled faintly. It's been a while since we've gotten together with Margaret. We should invite her to dinner as a thank you for fixing the gate. Sarah hesitated. I don't know, Marcus. We still need to go through some of these reports from the police about the new leads for Emma. I'd rather focus on that during dinner, not when we have company. Marcus's expression softened with a mixture of sadness and gentle reproach. Sarah, we've become so isolated and lonely over these 8 years. When was the last time we invited someone over? Years ago. Sarah didn't answer immediately, knowing he was right. They had gradually withdrawn from social connections, their search for Emma consuming every aspect of their lives. Margaret, too, Marcus continued. Look at how private she's become after her husband and daughter died in that house fire 10 years ago. Can you imagine living all alone for years? She must be a lonely woman. He paused, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. It might be good to sit down and have dinner together. We've all gone through similar experiences of loss. Maybe we could form a new bond. Sarah considered his words, her gaze drifting back to the stack of documents on the table. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps they both needed this small step toward normalcy. All right, she finally said. I'll go invite her for dinner tonight. Marcus's smile was worth the concession. It had been too long since she'd seen genuine happiness on his face. Sarah zipped up her jacket and stepped outside into the crisp winter air. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she crossed the street toward Margaret's house. It was a modest 2-story home, similar to most in their neighborhood, though somewhat less maintained. The paint was peeling in places, and the snowfall had been left untended, piling up in recent years. When she reached Margaret's front door, Sarah knocked firmly and waited. After a minute with no response, she knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. She was about to turn and leave when she heard sounds coming from behind the house. A dull thudding noise like someone hammering. Sarah rounded the corner of the house, her boots sinking into the deeper snow of the backyard. "Margaret," she called out. "It's Sarah from across the street." The sounds led her to a small wooden structure at the far end of the yard, an old garden shed that had been there for as long as Sarah could remember. Margaret was crouched inside it, seemingly adjusting something. At the sound of Sarah's voice, Margaret froze momentarily before carefully backing out of the small structure. "Sarah," Margaret said, sounding slightly breathless. "Sorry, I didn't hear you knocking." "No problem," Sarah replied, noticing how quickly Margaret had straightened up and positioned herself in front of the shed. "I'm surprised you're still keeping that old garden shed. It's been years since you did any gardening, hasn't it? Do you want help tearing it down?" Margaret's response came with a slight stutter. It's a reminder of my daughter. She used to play in there. I like keeping it around." Sarah nodded, understanding the sentiment. People clung to different reminders of those they'd lost. Margaret gestured to a partially built larger structure nearby. "Actually, I've been thinking about getting back into gardening. I've been working on that for a few weeks now and wanted to complete it this morning." Sarah's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Seriously? You're still working in this weather? That's impressive, Margaret. I used to garden myself when I was younger. More of a hobby than anything, really. What kind of plants are you thinking about growing?" "I haven't thought much about it," Margaret replied, seeming more relaxed now that the conversation had shifted. "Maybe some vegetables or herbs." "Well, Marcus and I actually wanted to invite you to dinner tonight," Sarah said. "But if you don't mind, I could help you finish that new garden structure this morning, and we could go plant shopping together afterward. I know a local nursery in the area." Margaret seemed to consider this for a moment before nodding. "I'd appreciate that. I should be able to finish this in a few hours, and dinner sounds nice. Thank you." As they talked, Sarah noticed Margaret occasionally glancing back at the old garden shed. There was something odd about her neighbour's behaviour, but Sarah couldn't quite place what it was. Margaret had always been a private person, especially after her tragedy. So perhaps it was just her discomfort with the unexpected social interaction. "Great. I'll leave you to it then," Sarah said, taking a step back. "Just come over when you're ready to head out to the nursery, and we'll see you for dinner around 6. Margaret nodded, already turning back toward the garden shed. "I'll see you then." As Sarah walked back across the street, she couldn't shake a strange feeling. There was nothing overtly suspicious about their interaction. Margaret had been perfectly cordial, if a bit awkward. Yet something felt off. Perhaps it was just the unusual sight of her reclusive neighbour suddenly making plans for gardening after years of neglect. Or perhaps it was just the oddity of someone doing all that construction work out in the snow. Reaching her own front door, Sarah brushed the thoughts aside. People processed grief differently, and if Margaret was finally taking steps to move forward with her life, that could only be a good thing. Sarah entered her house, stamping the snow from her boots in the entryway. Marcus was in the living room straightening up the scattered throw pillows and magazines that had accumulated over the week. "She said yes to dinner," Sarah announced, hanging her jacket on the hook by the door. Marcus's face brightened. "That's wonderful. What time should I expect her?" "Around 6, I think. You know what's interesting? She's building a new garden structure and planning to get back into gardening. I offered to take her plant shopping this afternoon." Marcus paused in his tidying and looked up with genuine surprise. "Gardening after all these years?" He smiled thoughtfully. "See, I told you she must be feeling lonely. Getting back into hobbies is a good first step toward healing." Sarah returned to the dining table where she'd left the police documents. "I suppose so. It's just unexpected. She's kept that old garden shed all these years as a memorial of sorts." Marcus resumed his cleaning, moving into the kitchen. "People find different ways to move on. Speaking of which, we need groceries for dinner tonight. We're running low on everything, and I want to make something special." Sarah sighed quietly, looking down at the stack of papers before her. She'd been hoping to spend the morning reviewing the new leads, compiling her thoughts before the week ahead consumed her time again. "Can you grab what we need? I'd really like to get through these documents today. If you don't mind, can you help me with the grocery run instead?" Marcus asked. "I want to clean the house properly for tonight, and you know, I don't drive well in this weather. It's too cold to walk or wait for the bus." Sarah looked at her husband's hopeful expression and felt a familiar pang of guilt. He asked for so little these days, and he'd been the one to suggest reconnecting with their neighbour, a small but significant step toward normalcy. "All right," she conceded. "I still have some time before Margaret's ready to go to the nursery anyway. I'll do the grocery run, drop everything back here, and then head out with her if she's ready." Marcus's grateful smile was worth the sacrifice of her morning plans. He quickly wrote out a shopping list, adding items as he checked the pantry and refrigerator. Sarah headed outside again, shoveling a path from their front door to the driveway before starting the car. She let the engine idle for a while to warm up, her breath curling into small clouds in the crisp, cold air. As she was about to pull out of the driveway, she noticed Margaret crossing the street toward her. "Sarah!" Margaret called, approaching the car window. Sarah rolled down the window. "Hey, all set with the garden structure already?" Margaret shook her head. "Actually, I just remembered I already have plans to meet with some friends this morning. I'll have to cancel our trip to the nursery, Bea." "But I'll still come for dinner tonight." "No problem at all," Sarah replied, surprised that the reclusive Margaret had social plans. "I'm just heading out for groceries. We'll see you at 6. Margaret nodded and turned back toward her own house. Sarah watched her go, that strange feeling returning. In all the years they'd been neighbours, she'd never known Margaret to mention friends or social gatherings. But then again, they hadn't exactly been close in recent years, both families retreating into their private sorrows. Sarah drove to the supermarket, her mind toggling between thoughts of Emma and mental notes of what to buy. The grocery store was relatively empty for a Saturday, most people likely deterred by the weather forecast predicting more snow later that day. She methodically worked through Marcus's list, adding a few items she knew he liked, but had forgotten to write down. As she loaded the groceries into the car, heavy grey clouds were gathering overhead, promising the predicted snowfall would arrive sooner rather than later. As Sarah pulled out of the supermarket parking lot, a familiar car passed by on the main road. She did a double-take, recognizing Margaret's blue sedan. The car's windows were clear enough that Sarah could easily see Margaret was alone, driving in the opposite direction from where their neighborhood was located. Sarah's route home followed the same road for a while, and she found herself unintentionally trailing Margaret at a distance. A few minutes later, Margaret's car pulled into the parking lot of Greenwood Nursery, a local plant store that Sarah had mentioned earlier. Sarah drove past slowly, confusion settling in. Margaret had cancelled their trip together, claiming she had plans with friends. Yet here she was at the very nursery alone. For a moment Sarah considered pulling in as well, but what would she say? She had no right to question Margaret's white lie. Perhaps the Wugoo man simply preferred to choose plants on her own without the pressure of someone else's opinions. Or maybe she was meeting her friends there. Still, as Sarah continued home, the inconsistency bothered her. It seemed a strange thing to lie about, especially when Sarah had offered her help and expertise. But Margaret had always been odd and private, more so since her tragedy. By the time Sarah arrived home, light snow had begun to fall again. She unloaded the groceries quickly and found Marcus in the kitchen, already preparing for dinner. "You're back sooner than I expected," he said, taking a bag from her hands. Sarah nodded. "There wasn't much traffic. And actually I saw Margaret at the nursery on my way back." "The nursery? I thought she cancelled with you." "She did," Sarah replied, setting down the remaining bags on the counter. "Said she had plans with friends, but I just saw her pulling into Greenwood Nursery alone." Marcus paused in unpacking the groceries. "Well, that is strange, but it's not really our business, is it? Maybe she just wanted to look on her own first." "Maybe," Sarah agreed, though something about it still felt off to her. As they stored the groceries, Sarah glanced out the kitchen window and noticed Margaret's car pulling into her driveway across the street. Margaret got out and opened her trunk, revealing several large bags of gardening supplies and what appeared to be some kind of small greenhouse kit. From this distance, and with Margaret's back to her, Sarah couldn't see exactly what she had purchased, but there seemed to be quite a lot of materials. "She's back already," Sarah remarked. "With quite a haul of gardening supplies, it looks like." Marcus joined her at the window. "That was quick. She must have really known what she wanted. Love at first sight does happen, I suppose." "That's still odd, though," Sarah said, echoing Marcus's earlier sentiment. "I used to garden extensively. I know these shopping trips usually take some time, especially when you're getting back into it after years away." She was in and out incredibly fast. They watched as Margaret struggled to carry multiple heavy bags across her snowy yard, making several trips back and forth to her car. "She's having trouble with all that," Sarah observed. "I should go help her." Before Marcus could respond, Sarah was already heading for the door. She crossed the street quickly, calling out to Margaret as she approached. "Need a hand with those bags?" Margaret's head snapped up, her expression momentarily startled. No, I'm fine," she said quickly, her tone sharper than the situation warranted. "I'll see you this evening," she added, clearly dismissing Sarah. Taken aback by the abrupt response, Sarah hesitated. "All right, if you're sure." Margaret just nodded, already turning her attention back to the heavy bags and struggling to carry them through the snowy yard. Sarah returned to her house, a growing uneasiness settling in her stomach. Something about Margaret's behavior seemed off, but what reason did she have to be suspicious of her neighbor? The woman had been nothing but quiet, if distant, all these years. As she entered her house again, Marcus gave her a questioning look. "She didn't want help," Sarah explained with a shrug. "Said she's fine on her own." Marcus nodded, returning to his dinner preparations. "Some people just don't like accepting help. It makes them feel vulnerable." "I suppose," Sarah agreed, though she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Margaret's strange behavior than simple pride. The hours passed slowly as the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Maple Hollow in a fresh coat of white. Sarah had returned to her stack of police documents, finally able to concentrate on reviewing them. There weren't many new developments, just the same frustrating lack of concrete leads that had characterized the search for Emma from the beginning. One report mentioned a possible sighting in a town 200 miles south, but the description was vague, and the follow-up investigation had yielded nothing. Another referenced a child matching Emma's description, who had been enrolled in a school in Montana under a different name. But when authorities had checked, it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. Sarah rubbed her temples, fighting off the headache that always seemed to accompany these review sessions. 8 years of false hopes and dead ends had taken their toll, but she couldn't give up. Somewhere out there, Emma might still be waiting for them to find her. As evening approached, Marcus's cooking filled the house with warm, inviting aromas. He had prepared a pot roast with vegetables, fresh dinner rolls, and an apple pie for dessert. It was more elaborate than their usual meals, a sign of how important this small social occasion was to him. "Do you think she'll actually show up?" Sarah asked as she helped set the table. Marcus arranged napkins beside each plate. "Why wouldn't she?" "I don't know. She's been acting strangely today. All these last-minute changes of plans, the way she reacted when I offered to help with the gardening supplies." Sarah trailed off, unsure how to articulate her vague misgivings. "She's probably just nervous about socializing after being alone for so long," Marcus reasoned. "Let's give her the benefit of the doubt." At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Margaret stood on their porch holding a bottle of wine, her coat dusted with snow. "I hope Red is all right," she said, handing the bottle to Sarah. "Perfect. Thank you," Sarah replied, stepping aside to let her in. "Come on in out of the cold." Marcus greeted Margaret warmly, taking her coat and thanking her for coming. The initial awkwardness of the reunion gradually eased as Marcus served drinks, and they settled at the dining table. The conversation remained light at first. Local news, the weather, harmless topics that required little emotional investment. As they began to eat, Sarah decided to broach the subject of Margaret's new gardening project. "So, I see you got quite a lot of supplies today. How's the new garden structure coming along?" Margaret's fork paused midway to her mouth, and Sarah noticed a subtle tension in her posture. "It's fine. Still working on the setup." "That was a quick trip to the nursery," Sarah said casually. "I saw you heading that way on my drive back from the supermarket right after you mentioned meeting up with some friends." Margaret's eyes flickered nervously. "I'm sorry about that. My schedule became unpredictable. My friend cancelled last minute, and I was so excited about getting back into gardening that I just went ahead to the nursery." Sarah nodded, sipping her wine. "I was surprised they had everything you needed so quickly. When I was gardening regularly, choosing the right supplies usually took a while, especially for larger projects." Margaret shifted in her chair. "Actually, I had researched it all online beforehand. I knew exactly what I wanted." The explanation sounded reasonable enough, but Sarah couldn't shake what she remembered from that morning. Margaret had said she wasn't even sure yet what kind of plants she wanted to grow, and something about Margaret's demeanor now, the way she avoided direct eye contact, the faint tremor in her hand as she reached for her glass, hinted at a discomfort that went deeper than simple social awkwardness. Marcus, sensing the growing tension, gently changed the subject. "Margaret, Sarah mentioned you lost your husband and Dart 10 years ago. I'm so sorry. We understand how hard it is to lose family." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Yes, it's been difficult living alone all these years." "We know something about that kind of pain," Marcus said quietly. "After Emma disappeared—" He didn't get to finish his thought. Margaret suddenly became visibly agitated, her gaze fixed on the window where the snow was now falling heavily. "I'm very sorry," she interrupted, "but I think I should check on my garden project. It's snowing harder now, and I'm worried about some delicate seedlings I just planted. I forgot to cover them before coming here." She stood up abruptly. "I'm afraid I left them in a temporary setup, and I'm concerned about the cold affecting them." Sarah glanced out the window at the intensifying snowfall. "Yes, you're right. The wind's picking up too. Do you need help covering them?" No, Margaret said quickly, almost panic-stricken at the suggestion. "The setup is very specific, and I'm still figuring out the best configuration. I'll handle it and come back after I'm done." Marcus rose from his chair. "Of course. Just make sure your plants are safe. We live right across the street. Don't worry about rushing back if they need your attention." Margaret nodded gratefully and headed for the door, leaving her coat hanging on the rack in her haste. After she left, Sarah and Marcus returned to the table, the sudden departure leaving an awkward lull in the evening. "That was strange," Sarah remarked. Marcus shrugged, refilling their wine glasses. "She's concerned for her plants. It's understandable." "I suppose," Sarah agreed reluctantly. As they continued their meal, Marcus sighed softly. "Sarah, imagine if I was gone too, and you had to go to work and take care of the house alone. Margaret has been managing all that by herself for a decade. She must be a responsible woman to care so much about her new garden project. She deserves some happiness." Time passed, and Margaret didn't return. The pie Marcus had baked sat untouched on the counter, and the dining room grew quiet, except for the occasional clink of silverware. "It's okay if she doesn't make it back," Marcus said eventually. "The plants are new, so maybe she's having trouble with the setup." He began to clear the table, but paused when he noticed Margaret's coat still hanging by the door. "Oh, she forgot her coat. It's freezing outside." Sarah stood up. "I'll bring it back to her." Marcus nodded, continuing to clear the dishes as Sarah grabbed both Margaret's coat and her own before heading out into the snowy night. The snow crunched beneath Sarah's boots as she crossed the street, the cold air biting at her exposed face. Snowflakes swirled around her, illuminated by the streetlights like tiny stars falling to earth. Margaret's house was dark, except for a faint light visible from what Sarah assumed was the kitchen at the back. She approached the front door and knocked firmly, holding Margaret's coat folded over her arm. After waiting for nearly a minute with no response, she knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Sarah frowned, glancing at her watch. It had been over half an hour since Margaret had left their house. Surely it shouldn't take that long to cover some plants, even if the setup was complicated. As she stood there contemplating what to do next, a distinct sound came from the backyard. It was faint, but it sounded like singing. A voice, soft and melodious, carrying what sounded like a lullaby. Concern overriding hesitation, Sarah made her way around the side of the house, calling out as she went, "Margaret, it's Sarah. Are you okay? I brought your coat." The backyard was partially illuminated by the light spilling from the kitchen window. Sarah could make out the garden structure Margaret had been working on, but saw no sign of her. The singing continued, clearer now, and it seemed to be coming from underground, from beneath the old garden shed. Sarah looked around for Margaret, but saw no sign of her. The situation made no sense. Margaret had left their dinner specifically to tend to her seedlings, yet there was no evidence of any plant care, and the mysterious singing was coming from below ground. Approaching cautiously, Sarah noticed that what she had always assumed was a simple garden shed had some unusual features. There were small air vents along the sides that she'd never noticed before, and the structure seemed to be sitting on what looked like a concrete foundation rather than directly on the earth. "Margaret!" Sarah called again, louder this time. No response. She peered through the kitchen window, but could see no movement inside. Margaret's car was still in the driveway, and in this weather at this hour, it seemed unlikely she would have gone anywhere on foot, especially without her coat. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed Margaret's number. The call went straight to voicemail after several rings. A growing sense of unease settled in her stomach. As she put her phone away, the singing suddenly stopped. The abrupt silence was somehow more unsettling than the mysterious voice had been. Keeping alert, Sarah moved to get a better look at the garden shed. From her new position, she could see something she hadn't noticed before. A wooden panel in the floor of the structure that looked like it could be moved, with what appeared to be an unlocked padlock sitting on top of it. There was also a metallic glint that might be a handle of some sort embedded in the panel. The singing had definitely been coming from beneath this structure. But who could be down there? And why would Margaret have some kind of underground space beneath her garden shed? Drawing on her maternal instincts, Sarah approached the shed carefully. What she had initially taken for a simple garden shed floor was actually a sophisticated trapdoor. The metal handle and latch were reminiscent of old storm cellars she'd seen in rural areas. A cold feeling that had nothing to do with the winter air washed over her. Why would Margaret have a cellar hidden beneath a garden shed? And why had she been so secretive and evasive all day? Sarah stood up and stepped back, her mind racing. She needed to talk to Marcus. Fumbling with her phone, she dialed home. "Marcus," she said when he answered, her voice tight with tension. "I found something strange in Margaret's backyard. There's some kind of cellar or underground room under the garden shed." "A cellar?" Marcus's surprise was evident. "What do you mean?" "There's a trap door in the floor of the shed with a handle and latch like the kind you'd see in old storm cellars. I heard singing coming from down there, a woman's voice singing what sounded like a lullaby. Margaret is nowhere to be found, she's not answering her phone, and her car is still here." There was a pause before Marcus responded. "That sounds concerning. Do you think she might be down there? Maybe she fell or got trapped somehow." "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "The padlock on the door is unlocked, which means someone could be down there. But why would she build a garden shed over a cellar entrance? It doesn't make sense." "It could be dangerous," Marcus warned. "Maybe we should call the police just to be safe. Your phone battery was low earlier. I'll make the call." Sarah nodded, though he couldn't see her. "All right, but tell them it's just a welfare check. I'm worried Margaret might be in trouble down there. I can't reach her, and her house is locked, but her car is here." "Promise me you won't go down there," Marcus insisted. "Come home, and we'll wait for the police together." "I promise," Sarah agreed. "I'll be right back." She ended the call and cast one last look at the trap door. The rational part of her knew she should follow Marcus's advice and wait for the authorities. But another part of her, the part that had been searching for answers for 8 long years, was drawn to the mystery beneath the garden shed. Before she could make a decision, a noise came from the cellar, a metallic sound like someone climbing a ladder or stairs. Sarah froze, her gaze fixed on the trap door, which remained closed. The sounds grew louder and clearer, unmistakably footsteps on metal rungs. Then, with a scraping noise, the wooden panel moved, and the padlock fell to the side as the lid opened. Margaret emerged from the opening, crawling awkwardly out of the narrow space. When she straightened and saw Sarah standing there, her face registered pure shock, quickly followed by something darker. Fear? Anger? It was hard to tell in the dim light. "Sarah," Margaret said, her voice carefully controlled, but with an undercurrent of tension. "What are you doing here?" Sarah held up the coat. "You left this at our house? When you didn't come back, I thought I'd bring it over." She paused, then added, "I was worried when you didn't answer the door, and then I heard singing coming from underground." Margaret took the coat from Sarah's outstretched hand with slow, deliberate movements. "Thanks. Yeah, about that. I was just checking on some equipment down there. Old storm cellar, you know." Sarah couldn't help herself. She looked pointedly at the open trap door. "What's down there, Margaret? Who was singing?" Margaret's posture stiffened, her expression guarded. "Nothing that concerns you." "I was looking for you," Sarah pressed. "I started to get worried when you didn't answer your phone or come to the door. Your car is here, but you weren't. Margaret didn't respond directly to this. Instead, she glanced around nervously. You shouldn't be snooping around my property. I wasn't snooping, Sarah explained. I heard the singing and got concerned when I couldn't find you. Margaret's jaw tightened visibly. Sarah decided to be direct. Why have you been lying to me all day, Margaret? You said you were going to tend to seedlings, but there's no evidence of any plant care. You said you were meeting friends when you went to the nursery alone. You claimed to be building a garden structure, but you've clearly got some kind of underground facility here. Sarah paused, studying Margaret's increasingly agitated expression. What's really going on? For a moment, there was silence broken only by the sound of the wind and the occasional creak from the shed structure. Then, without warning, Margaret lunged forward. Sarah barely had time to react before Margaret slammed into her, grabbing her jacket and pushing her backward with unexpected strength. They grappled in the snow, Margaret's face contorted with a mixture of rage and fear. You should have minded your own business, Margaret snarled, landing a solid punch to Sarah's midsection. The blow knocked the wind out of Sarah, but years of staying active despite her grief had kept her strong. She managed to block Margaret's next swing and push the woman off her. What are you hiding, Margaret? Sarah demanded, circling warily now, keeping her distance. Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she charged again, this time driving her knee into Sarah's stomach as they collided. Sarah doubled over, gasping, and Margaret used the opportunity to shove her toward the open trap door. Get in there, Margaret commanded, her voice eerily calm now despite the violence of her actions. Crawl in and go down. Sarah straightened, wincing from the pain in her abdomen. You can't make me go down there. A chilling smile spread across Margaret's face as she reached behind her back and produced a handgun. It's either you climb down yourself, or I'll drop your dead body down there. Your choice. The sight of the weapon sent a jolt of fear through Sarah, but she maintained her composure. The police are on their way here, Margaret. Marcus called them when I couldn't find you. If you fire that gun, every neighbor will hear it. Frustration flashed across Margaret's face, but she kept the gun trained on Sarah. Instead of shooting, she stepped forward and struck Sarah across the face with the weapon, sending her stumbling backward. Blood trickled from a cut above Sarah's eye as Margaret continued to push her toward the shed, trying to force her to crawl into the narrow opening. Despite the pain and disorientation from the blow, Sarah fought back, grabbing Margaret's wrist and twisting it until the gun fell from her grasp. In a desperate move, Sarah kicked the weapon, sending it sliding across the wooden floor of the shed and down into the darkness of the cellar below. Enraged, Margaret charged again, but this time Sarah was ready. She sidestepped and used Margaret's momentum against her, sending her crashing into the side of the shed. In the distance, the wail of police sirens cut through the night air. Margaret's head snapped up at the sound, panic replacing rage in her expression. Moments later, 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of the house, their lights bathing the snowy yard in alternating red and blue. Officers emerged quickly, hands on their holsters as they approached the scene of the struggle. Police! Hands where we can see them! One officer shouted. Both women raised their hands, though Margaret did so reluctantly, her face a mask of frustration and defeat. The officers separated them, one checking Sarah's bleeding face, while the other restrained Margaret. What's going on here? The first officer demanded. Before Sarah could respond, Marcus appeared, having followed the police cars from their house. Sarah, are you okay? He called, hurrying to ward her. I'm fine, she assured him, though the cut above her eye was still bleeding freely. Sarah quickly explained to the officers what had happened, how Margaret had acted strangely all day, how she discovered the cellar beneath the garden shed, and how Margaret had attacked her when confronted. She pulled a gun on me, Sarah added. I managed to disarm her, but the weapon fell down into the cellar. The officers looked at Margaret, who remained silent, her expression unreadable. Is that true, ma'am? One officer asked her. Did you assault this woman and threaten her with a firearm? Margaret didn't respond. "We're going to have to take you in," the officer continued, reciting Margaret's rights as his partner secured handcuffs around her wrists. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the officer continued the Miranda warning, another police car arrived, followed by an ambulance. Paramedics rushed to check Sarah's injuries, while additional officers secured the scene. One of the officers approached the open trapdoor, shining a flashlight down into the darkness below. "There appears to be some kind of underground room here," he reported, peering down. "I can see metal stairs leading down." Before anyone could respond, a noise emanated from within the cellar. The unmistakable sound of someone climbing the metal stairs. Everyone froze, officers immediately drawing their weapons and training them on the opening. The paramedic pulled Sarah back and Marcus gasped, clutching his wife's arm. The climbing sounds grew louder, more distinct with each passing second. Then, slowly, a figure began to emerge from the darkness. It was a young woman, approximately 13 years old, with long blonde hair that hadn't been cut in some time. She was thin, pale, and obviously frightened, her wide eyes blinking in the sudden brightness of the officers' flashlights. In her trembling hands, she held Margaret's gun. The officers tensed, calling out for the girl to drop the weapon, but she seemed confused and terrified, pointing the gun wildly at the crowd of strangers surrounding her. "Mom," the girl called out, her voice cracking with fear as her gaze found Margaret. "I won't let the enemy catch you. I'll protect you, Mom, and our home." Her hands shook violently as she gripped the weapon. "I want to be a soldier like you." The officers exchanged bewildered glances, maintaining their positions, but clearly uncertain how to proceed with a clearly frightened child holding a deadly weapon. "Honey, put the gun down," one officer said gently. "It's not safe for someone your age to handle that." The girl's finger twitched near the trigger. "I know how to use this," she insisted, her voice trembling. "Mom taught me. The country's at war. You're the enemy. You want to take Mom and our home." Sarah stared at the girl, a strange numbness spreading through her body that had nothing to do with her injuries. There was something hauntingly familiar about the child's features, the shape of her face, the color of her hair, the set of her jaw. "Emma!" The name escaped Sarah's lips in a breathless whisper. The girl's eyes flickered toward her, confusion evident in her expression. Sarah stepped forward slowly, ignoring the paramedic's attempt to hold her back. "Emma, what do you mean? We're not in a war, and Margaret is not your mother." She swallowed hard, hardly daring to hope. "Your father and her...
I are your parents."
The girl's confusion deepened, her hands trembling more violently now.
"You're lying," she said, though there was uncertainty in her voice. "You just want to kill us. You hate us."
Her voice broke.
"My real mum died in a war. Mum said she was shot by the military."
Marcus stepped forward now, tears streaming down his face. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and showed the girl the screen, his wallpaper unchanged for 8 years, showing a 5-year-old Emma smiling widely at the camera. "You were kidnapped," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've been searching for you all these years. We missed you so much, Emma." The girl stared at the phone, her resolve visibly wavering. She looked at Margaret, silently pleading for guidance or explanation, but Margaret refused to meet her gaze, staring resolutely at the ground. Taking advantage of the girl's distraction, one of the officers gently approached and carefully took the gun from her unresisting hands, quickly securing and disarming it. Emma didn't resist. She continued to stare at the photo on Marcus's phone, confusion and the first glimmers of recognition washing over her face. "We're really not in a war?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "No, sweetheart," Sarah assured her, fighting to keep her voice steady. "There's no war. Margaret, she pretended all these years to be your mother, when your real father and mother were searching everywhere for you." Sarah stepped closer, cautiously reaching out to touch Emma's hand. The girl flinched initially but didn't pull away, allowing the contact. It was as though some deep-buried memory was stirring within her, responding to her mother's touch. The paramedics moved in, wrapping Emma in a shock blanket and guiding her toward the ambulance. Sarah followed closely, unwilling to let her daughter out of her sight again. Marcus watched them go, his heart pounding with a mixture of shock, joy, and disbelief. One of the officers approached him. "Sir, we need to ask you and your wife some questions, but first, let's get your wife's injuries treated." Marcus nodded numbly, his gaze fixed on the ambulance where his long-lost daughter was being examined. After 8 years of searching, of hoping against hope, Emma had been just across the street the entire time. The following hours passed in a blur for Sarah. Paramedics cleaned and bandaged the cut above her eye and examined her bruised ribs, concluding that nothing was broken. Physically, she would recover quickly. Emotionally, she was still processing the miraculous turn of events. In the back of the ambulance, Emma sat wrapped in blankets, answering basic questions from both medical personnel and police officers. The girl's confusion was evident. Her entire worldview had been shattered in a matter of minutes. When Sarah approached, Emma regarded her with a mixture of weariness and curiosity. Marcus sat beside their daughter, not touching her, but close enough to offer comfort if she wanted it. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked gently, careful not to overwhelm her. Emma shrugged, her eyes darting between Sarah and the officers nearby. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything's different than what Margaret, told me." One of the officers, a kind-faced woman who had introduced herself as Detective Rodriguez, sat across from Emma with a notepad. "Emma, I know this is confusing, but can you tell us a little about what it was like living with Margaret? Did she ever hurt you?" Emma shook her head. "She was just training me really hard, physical training, and recently how to use the gun." She paused, frowning. "She said I needed to learn to protect myself for when she wasn't there anymore. She said the war would last a long time. Told me to hide deep in the cellar because things got worse out there." "Do you know what year it is, Emma?" Detective Rodriguez asked gently. The girl hesitated. Margaret said it doesn't matter down there. Time works differently during wartime. It's 2015. "It's 2023, the detective informed her. "You've been missing for 8 years. Do you remember anything about where you lived before the cellar?" Emma's brow furrowed in concentration. I don't know. I've been in the cellar for as long as I can remember. Margaret said it was too dangerous outside because of the war." She looked around at the peaceful, if snowy, neighborhood. "But there is no war, is there?" "No," Sarah confirmed softly. "There's no war. There never was." From the police car where Margaret was being held, they could see her watching them, her expression unreadable. Another officer approached the ambulance. "We found something interesting in the cellar," he reported. "It's fully stocked with supplies, food, water, medical equipment. There's a generator, air filtration system, even educational materials, and we found several firearms, just as the girl mentioned." Detective Rodriguez nodded. "Sounds like she was prepared for a long stay down there." She turned back to Emma. "Did Margaret ever let you leave the cellar?" Emma shook her head. "Never. She said it was too dangerous. She went out for supplies sometimes and said she was helping other people who were hiding from the war. She told me that when I was old enough, I could help her." Sarah's mind reeled at the implications. Margaret had kept Emma imprisoned for 8 years, constructing an elaborate lie about a fictional war to keep her compliant and afraid to leave. "The garden structure," Sarah said suddenly, remembering what had started this chain of events. "She was building it to better conceal the entrance to the cellar, wasn't she? And all those gardening supplies she bought today were actually more supplies for keeping Emma down there." Detective Rodriguez nodded. "That's our theory as well. Looks like she was having trouble keeping Emma confined as she got older and more curious. The new setup was meant to be another layer of security." As they talked, a forensic team arrived and began processing both the cellar and Margaret's house. Officers cordoned off the property with yellow crime scene tape, and curious neighbours had begun to gather despite the late hour and cold weather. Eventually, the paramedics decided that Emma should be taken to the hospital for a full medical examination. Years of living underground with limited sunlight and exercise would have had effects on her development that needed to be assessed.
"Can we go with her?"
Sarah asked, her voice breaking slightly.
"Please, we just found her."
The paramedics agreed, and soon they were headed to Maple Hollow Memorial Hospital, Sarah and Marcus riding alongside their daughter. They maintained a respectful distance, understanding that for Emma, they were still essentially strangers, despite the biological connection. At the hospital, doctors conducted a thorough examination, while Sarah and Marcus waited anxiously. Detective Rodriguez joined them, her expression grave. "Margaret's not saying much, but from what we've pieced together, and what Emma has told us, it seems she kidnapped your daughter the day she went missing. She happened to have that old storm cellar on her property, and built the garden shed right on top of it, though we're not sure why. Possibly as a response to her own family tragedy." Sarah nodded. Her husband and daughter were killed in a house fire about 10 years ago. She was never the same after that. That likely triggered whatever mental break led to this, the detective agreed. Marcus wiped away tears. 8 years of lies. Our poor girl doesn't even know what the world is really like. The psychological recovery will be challenging, Detective Rodriguez acknowledged. But children are remarkably resilient. With proper support and therapy, she has every chance of adapting to normal life again. Dr. Patel, the pediatrician who had examined Emma, approached them with a clipboard in hand. Physically, she's malnourished and shows signs of vitamin D deficiency, which is expected given the circumstances. Her muscle development is below average for her age, but there are no signs of physical abuse. She appears to have been fed regularly and kept in relatively sanitary conditions. Sarah covered her mouth, fighting back a sob of relief. Marcus put his arm around her, drawing her close. "Can we see her?" he asked. Dr. Patel nodded. "Yes. But please understand that she's still processing everything. She's asked some questions about you, which is a positive sign. But don't expect immediate recognition or affection. This will take time." They found Emma sitting up in a hospital bed, looking small and lost among the white sheets. When they entered, she looked up, her expression cautious, but no longer fearful.
"Hi," Sarah said softly, stopping at a respectful distance from the bed. "Hi," Emma replied, studying her face. You're really my mum?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "And you're my real dad?" Emma asked, turning to Marcus. "Yes," Marcus confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "We've been looking for you ever since you disappeared. We never gave up hope." Emma seemed to consider this. "Margaret, she told me my mum died, and that everyone outside was an enemy." She frowned. "Why would she lie like that?" Marcus exchanged a glance with Sarah, unsure how much to explain. "Margaret lost her own family a long time ago," he said carefully. "I think she was very sad and confused. She did a very wrong thing by taking you and lying to you." "Am I going to live with you now?" Emma asked, a hint of anxiety in her voice. "Yes, if that's okay with you," Sarah assured her. "We still have your room just the way it was. But nothing has to happen too quickly. We can take it one day at a time."
Emma nodded slowly.
I don't remember you,"
she admitted, her voice small.
"But when I saw your picture—"
She trailed off, uncertain. "It's okay," Marcus assured her. "We have plenty of time to get to know each other again." In the days that followed, the story of Emma's discovery and Margaret's deception spread throughout Maple Hollow. Local reporters clamoured for interviews with the family that had been miraculously reunited after 8 years. Sarah and Marcus declined all interview requests, focusing instead on helping Emma adjust to her new reality. They brought family albums to the hospital, showing her pictures of her early childhood and telling her stories about her life before the kidnapping. Margaret was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault, and multiple weapons violations. In the wake of her arrest, investigators discovered journals in the cellar detailing her deteriorating mental state over the years and her obsession with creating a second-chance family after losing her own. Watching her daughter now, Sarah felt a profound mixture of grief for the years lost and gratitude for this second chance. The road ahead would not be easy. Emma would need intensive therapy to overcome years of isolation and deception. But they were together again. After 8 years of searching, of hoping against hope, their family was finally whole. But even with Emma finally home, questions still lingered. What exactly had Margaret been preparing for? And could there be others, hidden away in cellars across small towns just like Maple Hollow? The answers might be buried deeper than anyone imagines. Keep watching the Witness Archives.